So this episode, it's called Tales of Hidden Treasure along the Seine. And when people, myself included, when we talk about Paris, we often use this term hidden treasure, just to basically, as a general way to describe a historical detail that was hidden in plain sight on a street that's of interest, or, a hidden gem of a restaurant, a bistro, a cafe, or whatever, just even a neighborhood. It's a hidden treasure of Paris. And you'll find a lot of articles about the treasures, so to speak. But this one, I really wanted to go into the legit hidden treasures. Like, I'm talking about valuable objects that were hidden either on purpose or were lost along the Seine River, right in the center of town, that in some cases are still there waiting, hidden, waiting for someone to discover them or to find them and enjoy their vast riches. So I thought we'd have a little bit of fun with that. And as I collect all these tidbits about Paris from various geographical points in the city and whatnot, and I realized that I had quite a few that were all grouped together in this one geographical spot, and I thought, well, that makes sense. So without further ado, let me just check in real quick with my live folks. Lois says, Corey, your tree is beautiful. I wish I could take credit for the tree, but a lot of it was Charlotte's design. Pretty much everything you see here at any point in my house is Charlotte's design, and we have an agreement where I just let her do her thing, and things usually work out well. Happy holidays to Heather Liebhart and Cheryl and Heron, and Lisa Chorney and Larry Allen and all those familiar names. It's great to have you here. So shall we jump into this episode? Let us head to the Seine River. So you can see here I've highlighted the spots that we'll be talking about today, and you'll see that very much central Paris. So we've got a couple of stories related to treasures of the Pont Neuf, and then a little bit to the left there we've got another bridge called the Pont Royal that has a very fun hidden treasure tale. True story. And then over there on the right-hand side, we've got some of the bridges on the Ile Saint-Louis. So in some way, I guess you could even call this hidden treasures of the bridges of Paris. So let's get started. This statue, some of you may recognize. It's on the Pont Neuf, famously facing the Place Dauphine, and it's a famous equestrian statue of King Henri IV, Henry IV, who reigned up until 1610. And this was, as I understand it, the very first equestrian statue of a king in France. And to best understand this story, this first tale of treasure, as it were, we've got to understand that there were two versions of this statue. The first one, which came along in the early 1600s, and then the second one that came along in the 19th century. The second one that came along, well, the French Revolution took care of the first one and they melted it down. And then the second one came along, and it was the Restoration period, where the Bourbon royal family, the Bourbon monarchy, came back in the form of Louis XVIII, long after the guillotine beheadings had happened. And Louis XVIII comes back after the Revolution and Napoleon, and he puts up essentially a copy of this beautiful bronze statue. And so you've got to appreciate the story, you've got to realize that there was a first original version of this, and then a copy in the 19th century. So with that in mind, let's fast forward to 2004 when some experts are restoring this and cleaning this statue. And they open up the back, just right here, the back of the statue, and they find a bunch of hidden treasures that were placed inside of the statue. And of course, these bronze statues are so darn heavy that they were always hollow. You could never have solid bronze. They would just collapse under their own weight. So these are usually always hollowed inside. And there was a relative tradition of placing some commemorative items or memorabilia inside these statues when they were inaugurated. So that's the first start of this is the first treasure story, as it were, because this is a diagram of what they found inside. In 2004, they found all these old documents, not only related to the installation of the first statue in the 1600s, but then later on in the 1800s when they put the copy up there as well. So we're going to talk about all of these beautiful treasures that they found here in the belly, and toile means a piece of fabric or canvas here on a rod, even some objects slipped inside of the arm of Henri, and then a very surprise one up in the head, and that's really where the story gets interesting. So I've got some images from the National Archives, and here we're going to look at three of the boxes. They found 4 boxes that were these beautiful handmade wooden boxes, all covered in lead for protection, and these were placed there in the early 1600s inside the belly of the beast, as it were. And so they fished 4 of these beautiful boxes out, and of course each containing their own treasures inside. And some of the documents that they found inside were like this, documents related from the 17th century to the installation of the statue, to the inauguration of the original one, and the inventory here. This is a list of the inventory. It's so funny how it's all so askew. I guess they didn't have very good quality rulers there in the 1600s. But this is the inventory of the original objects that they placed inside. Here's one as well. What they also found, hidden for hundreds of years inside the belly of this statue, were these old books. And these are 17th century ledgers of the royal budget, the finances of the kingdom of France in the 17th century, Henry's kingdom. And not only that, but these were written and sort of overlooked by the Duc de Sully, famously the royal treasurer of Henri IV. And a lot of you may know the Hôtel de Sully in the Marais, that beautiful hôtel particulier that you can walk through, and the gardens and the courtyard and everything. So that's the same Sully, the gentleman who would have taken care of these financial ledgers for Henri IV. And as if that wasn't cool enough, also in one of these lead boxes, 2 volumes written by Voltaire himself. Voltaire wasn't a contemporary of Henri IV, but after the fact, Voltaire wrote during the Age of Enlightenment these beautiful long poems, believe it or not, on the left-hand side. That is a poem, many, many pages, of the life of Henri IV, and that's why it made sense that they eventually opened up the statue and popped in Voltaire's text somewhere along the way in the 18th century. So isn't that fantastic? Talk about hidden treasures right there under your nose, all the way up until 2004. And that wasn't all. That's not the only thing that they found. They also found objects related to the second copy of the statue. So this is the 19th century, and you can see here the list, alphabetical order of the list of the members of basically the people who are responsible for bringing the copy back, reestablishing the statue of Henry IV. So they wanted to leave their own memorabilia as well. So there's the list of that. This is also an account of the inauguration of the second statue. And then also 26 medallions they found. Again, the belly of this horse was just absolutely packed with treasures. And they found 26 medallions of silver and bronze related to Louis XVIII, who was that restoration king who installed the copy of the statue. And of course, Henry IV being a Bourbon monarch, it made sense that later his descendant, Louis XVIII, would want to honor his distant relative and fellow Bourbon monarch. So this is beautiful, and I imagine unwrapping all of those. These are all at the National Archives today under lock and key, of course. And this concept was fairly common practice, as I said, to put that memorabilia in there. But what was really surprising is when they started going into the arm of the statue, inside of Henry's hollow arm, and they found this beautiful wooden cylinder, and inside of it this old scroll, this parchment scroll. And again, this is from the 19th century, but what that scroll, they were able to very carefully unravel that scroll, and you can see some of the faded writing. And what it is the 19th century artists and carvers and the sculptor who were behind creating the copy, and they decided to essentially sign their work by signing this parchment, rolling it up and packing it into this beautiful wooden container, and then into the hollow arm of Henry. Also tucked in the arm was this small tin, sort of a pewter tin container. And unfortunately, this document right here is in such bad shape that even the National Archives of France still can't open it. It's been deemed too fragile. And if they tried to unravel it and see what was written on there, it would just crumble and really turn into dust. So still to this day, we don't know what those artists of the statue wrote on this piece of parchment or this piece of paper, whatever it may be. And I don't know if we'll ever know. But here's where it gets even more fun. Unexpectedly, they found in the head of the statue another box. There's a little container of lead. And on let me zoom in here, on the top of it, there was a name, Meynell. And that name is one of the chiselers, one of the artists that was working on the second statue, on the copy. And Meynell happened to be a staunch Napoleon supporter. And the powers that be at the time of Louis XVIII, he didn't like Napoleon at all. He was essentially coming in to replace the old Napoleonic Empire that had come through post-French Revolution. And so what happened is, you see this here? There's this Meynell, this chiseler, this worker, put some kind of piece of fabric or cloth intentionally glued to the side of the container. And we don't know what it is. Again, it's way too fragile. They can't remove it to find out what actually is folded up in there, if it's text, if it's objects, because he used a special type of animal glue. And apparently that kind of animal glue is very common for when you want to conserve relics, religious relics, or pieces of hair or a fingernail or a small bone of some saint. And so because he used this Meynell character, this chiseler, because he used the same type of glue, there is a theory that being a Napoleon supporter, he decided, you know what? Seeing as to make the copy of this bronze statue, they actually melted down some Napoleon statues on the Place Vendôme and the Place des Victoires, and these Napoleonic era statues, they actually melted them down and said, basically, screw you to the Napoleonic Empire, and used that bronze to create the new statue of Henry. And so maybe this guy who was a Napoleon supporter decided to take some glue and some fabric. He may have even taken pieces of Napoleon's body. It might have been a hair or a fingernail or something, and some of the remains almost as a relic, and embedded them here into this little container, almost as thumbing his nose at the idea of melting down the Napoleon statues and putting up a Bourbon monarch statue in the form of what we see today. So hopefully I made myself clear on that. Let me check in with my live viewers here. Margaret says, ooh, DNA samples. Yeah, I guess they could. Tammy says, what a treasure trove. People are saying it looks like cookies. I guess you all are hungry. Jennifer Robinson, what a great comment. She says, our beautiful city never stops giving. That is so true. So these items are now under lock and key and safe and sound at the National Archives of France, of Paris. But there are still some treasure stories related to stuff that's still out there along the river that you actually may, technically you could go out and find them and get a hold of them. And I hope you're going to enjoy these. So in the 1600s, in an area that would later become Belgium. Actually, no, wait, I want to say something else. So here, I'm going to go to this bridge. I'm getting ahead of myself. This is called the Pont Royal. And the Pont Royal connects the Louvre here on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side is a street called the Rue du Bac in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. This is the third oldest bridge after the Pont Neuf and the Pont Marie. And it was begun in 1685. And it was entirely financed by King Louis XIV, the Sun King, which was very rare because Louis XIV actually didn't like Paris. He didn't particularly like Parisians, which is why he shipped everything out to Versailles. But to the surprise and the delight of Parisians, the Sun King said, I'm going to entirely finance the construction of this bridge, the Pont Royal, of course. That's why they called it the Royal Bridge in the end. And I've got an image of the construction here, of some engraving, and you can see them with the Louvre on the left-hand side and Saint-Germain-des-Prés on the right-hand side. One of the designers was Jules Mansart. If you ever heard of the famous rooftops, the French-style roofs of the Mansart roofs, he was one of the constructors of this, a favorite of King Louis. Now, before there were bridges here, there was a paid ferry that would go across and take you from one bank to the other. And that was known in French as a bac, B-A-C. So for those of you who know here on the right-hand side, the area of Saint-Germain-des-Prés in the 6th arrondissement, you're probably familiar with the street called the Rue du Bac, B-A-C. Well, it's named basically the street of the ferry because it dumped out originally right here where you would take the paid ferry or the bac, and that's why there's a Rue du Bac in Paris. So because of, let me go back here. Because it was such a big deal that this bridge was representing the Sun King, Louis XIV, and it was a big deal that it was a stone bridge, which was quite a novelty, and there were very few of those in Paris. So for that reason, they decided to inaugurate the laying of the first stone of the Pont Royal by embedding a treasure inside of this pylon right here. This is the first pylon on the side of the Louvre. So the Louvre is over here to the left. And inside there, when they were laying the first stones of this bridge, they took a beautiful cedar box over a foot long, and inside the cedar box, they placed a stash of 13 medallions. One of them was gold and 12 of them were pure silver. And they all were moments of the events of the reign of King Louis XIV. So it was to commemorate and to leave a souvenir, a bit of memorabilia of the king himself embedded somewhere inside this first pylon. They took the cedar box, sealed it up, they encased that in lead, just like they did with the previous statue that we talked about, and then they cemented it in here. And I took a random example. I don't know what the medallions look like, but here is just a general example of what one of the gold ones may have looked like. And so there was one of gold and 12 silver ones, probably extraordinarily valuable. And the cool thing is that they're still embedded somewhere, encased inside that first pylon of the Pont Royal. I'm not recommending any of you show up with your pickaxe and your scuba gear and go searching for it. You know, don't hurt yourselves or damage my city. But still, technically, it's fun to think that that treasure is right there, the Pont Royal, embedded, waiting to be discovered. And you can only imagine how valuable those medallions would be. I got to give a shout out to Daniel Molden in the comments, sending me some love. She says, Joyeux Noël to Corey and the Frites. Here's a better year and hopefully a big Frite meet. Heron Friend, thank you so much. He says, this is also interesting. My dad was a bridge builder. Wow, that's fantastic. He says, thanks for all these treasures. You are very welcome, Heron Friend. So there we are. You can still head over to the Pont Royal and contemplate the fact that right here in the first pylon is that valuable stash of medallions from the reign of Louis XIV in the 17th century. Next up, this one's fun. In the 1600s, again, kind of same period, in an area that would later become Belgium, there was a stonemason on a construction site, and he stumbled upon a tomb of a Merovingian French ruler, a king called Childeric I. And he was reigning in the 5th century AD. So Childeric I, his tomb was long forgotten there in what would become Belgium. And this is he. This is Childeric. So the tomb is discovered, and this construction worker, again, this is in the 1600s, comes upon the forgotten tomb of this royal character. And it's completely jam-packed with treasures. We're talking ornamented weapons and gold and silver coins and jewelry and gilded armor. There's even the skull of the king's favorite horse. They took the skull of the horse and placed it in the tomb as well. And then, of course, the royal harness, all gilded in gold and jewels. And it was just completely chock-block full. It didn't happen in Paris, but some of the treasure from that tomb made its way to Paris. And that's the topic of our next tale here. Because what was also found in this tomb of Childeric were these. Depending on which story you read, there were a number between 30 and 300 of these bees of pure gold and red glass. And so there were at least 30, as many as 300, depending on which text you come across. And what they were meant to do, probably most likely, is they would have literally adorned the royal robe of Childeric. Okay, they would have been attached to the actual tunic or the actual robe, and it must have been absolutely stunning. And so all these bees were found in the tomb as well. Everyone wanted to get their hands on these golden bees. I mean, they were very historic from the 5th century, and of course very valuable as well. So they got passed around through the centuries or through the decades, and eventually they were gifted to the Sun King, Louis XIV once again, who happened to be not very impressed by these golden bees. Who knows why? I guess he had his own treasures. And so he didn't really hold on to them in his home. He decided to put them on display in the Louvre and the Bibliothèque Nationale in the center of Paris. So that's where they were kept. And then years go by, 19th century comes through, thieves actually break into the National Library and they steal 175 pounds worth of treasures, including these bees, all these different artifacts from the bibliothèque. They melted down a lot of the gold and then hid the rest of the treasures, the stolen treasures, in bags at the bottom of the Seine. And this is where, remember if I showed you that original Google Maps, and on the right-hand side near the Ile Saint-Louis, there are two bridges that cut across that give access to the center of the Ile Saint-Louis. One of them is the Pont Marie, and one of them is the Pont de la Tournelle. So the story says that it was either one of these bridges that the police investigated and found huge sacks bags filled of these treasures, and they were sunken down by the thieves to the bottom of the Seine River. And they, of course, pulled out a bunch of these bags and recovered some of the golden treasures, and they found only 2 of these bees. Only 2. So the theory goes that some of these bees are still down in the bottom of the Seine somewhere, waiting to be found somewhere around the level of those 2 bridges that cut across the Ile Saint-Louis. Thank you so much, Larry. I see your support there in the comments. He says, Merry Christmas and a better New Year. Oh, yeah, fingers crossed for that better New Year for sure.
Is there something else I can help you?
I've got my Siri talking to me on my iPad. So it's not far-fetched to assume that there are other golden bees somewhere in the murky depths of the Seine right around the Ile Saint-Louis, and I think that's pretty fun. And who knows what other kind of treasures there are. Speaking of that, one of those bridges I mentioned on the Ile Saint-Louis, the Pont Marie, famously had, or I should say infamously, had houses all along the Pont Marie that sadly fell into the Seine. All of a sudden, they just collapsed because there was bad weather and a flood and whatnot. So probably everyone's valuable objects from that catastrophe are probably in that area as well, somewhere in the bottom of the river. So you can probably find all kinds of old personal effects from the 17th century, and these babies from the 5th century AD. How's that for hidden treasure? Hey, Margaret C., thanks for the love in the comments. She says, be well, Corey, and sweet family, Merry Christmas. I appreciate that. Thank you, Margaret. Speaking of bees, some of you, very astute viewers out there, may know that Napoleon is famous for bees. He brought back this idea of the bee as a symbol for his power and for his family, essentially. And let me zoom in here. And he put bees all over the Louvre and various bits of architecture. Hopefully you can see that here. He's got bees on his clothing there. And then even in the same portrait, if we scroll down, we've got beautiful golden bees there on the rug, on the fabric that he's standing on. And just an interesting fun fact, after the revolution came through and everybody hated the monarchy, and in particular the fleur-de-lis symbol that the kings all used, Napoleon decided he needed to come in post-revolution with a symbol that was royal and would link him back to the great leaders of France historically, but the fleur-de-lis symbol was a little bit too charged and way too controversial. So that's why he decided to go back to the bee concept, going all the way back to the Merovingian kings, and the bees came from that idea. So it was sort of linking him to the French monarchy and the power of those previous leaders, but without, using a controversial symbol. So that's essentially how the bee idea was born, or reborn, via Napoleon. Heron Friend says B for Bonaparte. Yeah, I'll go with that. Although in French, it's a different word that doesn't start with a B. So who knows, but I like that. I like that. Lisa Parker says, I did not know that about Napoleon. I'm so glad. If I can tell you a few things that you didn't know, then we can consider this episode a success. Okay, on to the next little treasure here. In 1607, there was the Pont Neuf was finished. We just talked about the Pont Neuf with the statue of Henri IV. And, famously, there are all these mascarons, these heads along the Pont Neuf, and 381 of them, to be exact, these sculpted faces. And it was a concept that was imported from Italy as early as the Roman Empire, and it was to protect from evil spirits, etc. And what happened was here, along the Pont Neuf, this is not the Pont Neuf. In fact, I should have pulled up an image of the mascarons. But there are 381 of them along the bridge, and a lot of them got worn and they would fall into the Seine River. But some of them, before they fell, they would be relocated here to the Square du Vert Galant. If you know the point of the Ile de la Cité, where you can descend the stairs and walk to the very, very point of Ile de la Cité and have the view here of the Seine. I don't know if you've noticed before, but they actually installed some of those old worn faces that needed to be replaced on the Pont Neuf, those mascarons. So there's a story of very recently, 2014, where a member of the diving team of the Préfecture, who was training one night under the Pont Neuf, was diving in the dark, murky waters of the Seine, almost 6 meters down, a good 20 feet or so, and he found this. This is in 2014. He found one of the heads, one of the mascarons of the Pont Neuf that had fallen and was just chilling out in the bottom of the Seine. And so he alerted everybody. They tried to figure out what it was. Let me rotate this for you. And you can see this is the headdress here and the forehead of the face. And then a lot of it was worn away. But the theory is that these are the originals from the 17th century, the originals of the Pont Neuf. And many of them literally just fell into the river and they were forgotten about for hundreds of years. And this thing is very substantial, by the way. It weighed, you can see it's not a great image here, but you can see this, it weighed 100 kilos, which is about 220 pounds. So it was actually quite an effort just to dredge it up from the bottom of the river. And my point is that there are almost guaranteed other mascarons, the original mascarons from the Pont Neuf, that are waiting for you at the bottom of the Seine if you've got a crew and some scuba gear and you can manage to get down there. Don't try it, by the way. You'll get arrested immediately and possibly kill yourself. But anyway, that's just, you can add that to the treasures of what we can find at the bottom of the Seine. While we're at it, I mean, if we're talking about the Pont Neuf area, famously the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, his name was Jacques de Molay, he was burned alive at the stake by one of the French monarchs right near the Pont Neuf. And so, of course, the rumor was that the Knights Templar had the Holy Grail in Paris and they were hiding the Holy Grail somewhere. So did they check the Holy Grail in the river and maybe that's down there too? Who knows? If you're down there, they're looking for these objects. Be careful. Fair warning, because they have found all kinds of weird stuff in the Seine. They found 19th century ammunition, an original Viking sword, a snapping turtle. They've once found a python in there, a crocodile famously, a washing machine, a toilet, sewing mannequins, vintage cameras. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that they have found. Some of them could be considered treasures, some of them not so much. But yeah, so just know that the Seine River is absolutely a treasure trove, to say the least. Okay, everybody, I think that's about it. Let me check in with everyone, see how you're doing. Thanks. Appreciate the super chats. It's really great. And Jennifer says, a new tour experience, Fritz Le Scuba Tour. Laura says, I wonder if someone has done sonar and mapped out the bottom of the Seine. I don't think so, but that would be pretty fantastic, wouldn't it? Okay, everybody, well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. Those are some of the treasures along the Seine. I'm sure there are others, and of course, if I discover the stories, I'll share them with you. But it's pretty fun to know that still today, technically, there's little bits of gold and medallions and who knows what down there along the river. It's pretty fun. So again, if you want to support me, there are links in the description for that. Patreon, the merch store, PayPal, etc., etc. And otherwise, I will catch you on the next one. I won't do a super chat. I won't do a cafe chat today, but tomorrow for my Patreon members, we're going to do a big holiday Zoom freak meet to hang out with each other and have a drink and just be festive together. So that's going to happen tomorrow if you're a Patreon member, Sunday the 20th. Otherwise, I'm probably going to take next weekend off because it's going to be Christmas, but hopefully I'll catch you soon with another episode. Thank you everybody so much. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to give you another slice of Paris real soon. Thank you, David Dubois, coming in there right at the wire with a super chat. Joyeux Noël, Corey, he says. Thank you, David. Same to you, my friend. I really appreciate all the support. Take care, everybody. Hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Take care.